الحمد لله وكفى والسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والذين جاهدوا فينا لنهدينهم سبلنا سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. One of the ways by which we can learn to be successful in the tasks that we apply ourselves towards is by looking at those people who have succeeded in that path before us. So for example, if you desire to become a scholar in the deen, one of the ways by which you can improve the chances or increase the chances of your becoming a scholar is to look at the scholars before you and say, well, what did they do to succeed? We do this in everything. I mean, for example, you decide you want to go to pharmacy school. So what are you going to do? You're going to go and talk to different people who've gone to pharmacy school. You're going to talk to pharmacists. You're going to talk to people who have made plans to go to pharmacy school. And it's under their guidance and their advice that you will, inshallah, succeed in what you intend to go after. So we do this pretty much for everything that we aim towards. Now, if you look through our history, you'll find that we have such incredible figures that came before us. And they were so successful in so many different aspects of their deen. I mean, you look at spiritually, the mashayikh that came before us. As far as knowledge is concerned, the ulama that came before us. As far as Quran is concerned, and the mufassirin that came before us. As far as hadith is concerned, the muhaddithin that came before us. In every single realm, there's these incredible people. You know, just to have someone like Imam Bukhari, rahmatullah alayh, in our history is just enormous. But then you say, okay, in hadith you have Imam Bukhari, Imam Muslim, Imam Ahmad, etc. And then you talk about each and every aspect of the deen. You talk about fiqh, you have Imam Shafi'i, Imam Malik, Imam Abu Hanifa, right? It's incredible what kind of people we have in our history. So when you study their lives, you begin to learn that there are advices that they gave, just through their own example, that helped others to understand how to achieve that rank. Anyway, in our more modern history, one of the great scholars that has come before this deen is Maulana Ashraf Ali Thanwi, very famous scholar of the subcontinent. And what was unique about his scholarship is that he attained pinnacle not only in knowledge, so he became just the peak of knowledge, but beyond that he also achieved that same state in the science of spirituality as well. So just as deep as his knowledge was, and as deep as the students that he trained to become scholars was, in the same way he had a group of people that he trained spiritually, and they were just as incredible. And it's amazing when you look through his history. So anyway, if you look as to the advices that he gives, concerning why was he was able to succeed, you'll see that basically there were three major things that he did, that he states that he did, that allowed him to succeed. So there were three things that he states that as a student he did, and it's those three things that he felt that allowed him to succeed. Okay, the first you've heard me talk about often, but it's so valuable that literally I could talk about it every single week, and I still think that you could not suffice giving this advice. So he says that when he was a student, one of the principles that he adopted was that he would not read anyone's mail. So what he would do is he had a little box. And every time the mailman brought any letter to him, he put it in that box at the beginning of the school year. And then he let the mail pile up until the end of the school year. So you're talking about basically 9 months. And at the end of the school year, he would open up the box, and then he would start reading through the messages. So he would go and begin to read the messages, and as he would read the messages, some things that he would note. Number one is that the vast majority of problems that arose, they solved themselves. You know, I mean, if somebody sends you a message 9 months ago, and you open it up now, it's probably not going to be very relevant, right? It's not going to be anything that distracts you. So after his studies, after 9 months of studying, Then he would open up all the mail, he would go through it, and then he would basically respond to what needed to be responded to. Now, when I read that, then I used to think, or when I used to read that or hear that from my teachers, and I've told you this as well, I used to think, well, that's not a big deal. I mean, so what? I won't check my mail for 9 months, right? But actually you have to put it in the context of your current state, which is so you won't check your email for 9 months, right? If somebody said to you that when I'm studying, I don't check my email, then, and they don't check it for 9 months, that would be an amazing feat. People would be shocked that this person hasn't checked his email for 9 months. But you can see how distracting email can even be. You know, sometimes you get an email which basically has nothing to do with anything, somebody writing about some topic that has nothing to do with your life. You start reading about it, then you go off your mind goes off into space, and now you're distracted for a couple hours. Or you read about something that basically doesn't really involve you, but then it begins to emotionally take over you, etc. So these are very distracting. And I can tell you that I'll give you one piece of advice concerning this whole email thing, and that is that the less you interact with the internet, the safer you're going to be. I get so many calls regularly, right? People who are calling with problems, people all calling with issues, and I'll tell you the internet is at the center of much of that. You know, people look at things that they shouldn't look, people do things that they shouldn't do, people are getting involved in things that they shouldn't be involved in, and the email really is central to all of that. So while there might be some benefit in the internet, I can still tell you that it's an extremely dangerous thing. It's extremely dangerous, and you have to treat it that way. Because the moment you become comfortable with it is the moment that it comes around and bites you in the back of the neck. It's like a snake. Yet you can hold it, and you can take it benefit. There's some benefit to it if you're careful with it. But the moment you become lax and you let that grip go just a bit, it slips through your hand and bites you in the back of the neck. Either you place yourself in a position that you never thought you would be in, or you get caught by someone else in a position that you never thought you would be in, or you end up reading something that you shouldn't have been reading, and it just psychologically impacts you tremendously. This, surfing on the net and reading all the news, and then you see all the death and the gory, and that has a huge effect on us. Spiritually, that has a big effect on a person. It can cause depression. It can cause you to become disheartened. It can cause you to start questioning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself and why he does certain things. And then when those types of things arise, they're very difficult to cure. So you got to be very careful about how you interact with that. Anyway, that was his first thing, that he would minimize his interaction with things outside of his studies. That's really the gist of it, right? What was away from his studies, he minimized his interaction with that. So that was the first point. And you've heard me talk about that. The other two I haven't spoken about before. The second thing that he used to do was he says that I used to every day from Asr to Maghrib clean the pots of my teachers. Now, this is also a very difficult thing to understand, especially when you're an American student. But basically what he's saying is that he used to serve his teachers. And actually this second piece of advice is broken down into two things. Number one, he used to clean the pots in the rooms of his teachers from Asr to Maghrib every day. And he says that once a week he used to go and he used to wash the clothes of his teachers. Now, people, when they hear these kind of things, they were really taken aback. And they say, well, what is he doing? Is he a servant of Allah or is he a servant of his teachers? I mean, what kind of thing is this? He's going and washing the clothes of his teachers and washing the pots of his teachers. I mean, this is a very dangerous thing. Actually, this is the way that we see it, but it's the way that we misunderstand it as well. See, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends you someone to benefit you, right? For example, in the case of Maulana Ashraf Tanwi and his teachers, when he has a good teacher, it's only because Allah created that opportunity. You don't understand until you put yourself into that circumstance. When you want to study the deen, and there's no teacher available to you, and then you're going and seeking some way of studying the deen, then it becomes clear to you how fortunate the person is who has a teacher. Same thing in tasawwuf, I'll tell you. I mean, I just sit down and think that, right now I have my teacher's available to me. There'll be a day when he won't be available. And then I start thinking, well, what am I going to do that day? I can't even imagine, where I would turn or what I would depend on or where I would be able to even derive my energy from. In my mind, that's just the way it is because I've already looked throughout the whole world and I can't think of anyone who even comes near my teacher because obviously he's my teacher. But I mean, I just think about that sometimes and it just paralyzes me. And the reason that we serve our teachers is not because we are becoming a servant to the teacher, but it's because we're actually showing our thankfulness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He provided the teacher. This starts way back in the history of our deen, in the way that the kuffar used to treat the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The reason that the kuffar had problems, they didn't have problems with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They didn't have a problem with the fact that Allah sent a Prophet alayhi salam. They didn't have problems that Allah would reveal a book upon that Prophet. They didn't have problems with the Prophet being able to tell them that things should be done in a certain way. They had a problem with why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose that particular individual as a Prophet. They said, why him? This person's rich, this person's this, he's not these things. So these are the excuses that people made. So, for us it's sort of part of that. Right? We recognize the Prophet ﷺ to be the Prophet ﷺ. We follow his sunnah. We emulate what he says. We do the things that he told us to do, avoid the things that he told us to avoid, not because of him, but because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala selected that individual. So the respect that we have for the Prophet ﷺ actually in essence is the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raised him. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala selected him and raised him, that's why we serve him in the way that we do. And that's why the Sahaba served him in the way that they did. So in the same way, when we're serving our teachers, what we're really saying is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provided us with this individual. At a time when we were looking to be guided academically, at a time that we were looking to be guided spiritually, whatever it might be, and the more khidmat that a individual does, the more they're going to be able to suck out barakah from that relationship. You know, your teachers are like a sponge. And then you interact with that sponge, and you basically hold that sponge over your head, and you're squeezing out the benefit. Alright? So you can just squeeze a little bit, and a little bit of water will drip over you. Or you can really squeeze that sponge hard, and a tremendous amount of water will then drip on top of you. But it's up to you to decide how much you want to squeeze. So when Mawlana Ashli Tanwi, rahmatullah alayhi, says that he used to serve his teachers from Asr to Maghrib, what he was actually doing was recognizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent him those teachers. And that without Allah sending him those teachers, there's no way he would have benefited. Then he's recognizing that this is actually the means by which an individual progresses. So this is the second advice that he gave. The third advice that he gave is that he said that during his free time, he used to gather the people of his village together and he used to speak to them about the deen. During his free time, he used to gather the people of his village together and he used to speak to them about the deen. And this basically is a means of showing that he didn't consider any group of people so low that their gathering would not be beneficial. You understand what I'm saying? So he didn't necessarily say, okay, I'm the greatest scholar, right? He was really the greatest scholar of his time, one of the greatest scholars of his time. So he could potentially argue, I'm not going to waste my time gathering people of my village together. I'm going to sit and teach students. And I'm going to spend all my time teaching students, and I'm going to sit with the most righteous individuals so that I can benefit them, and then they'll go out and benefit whoever they need to benefit. But no, he saw that any gathering in which people came together in order to try to improve themselves was beneficial because that was part of his sincerity. That was part of his sincerity. There's a lot of examples in this in our history, and I don't want to belabor the point, but I think that that's something that each and every one of us has to recognize. We think that, and I'll tell you that this deen, the spreading of this deen and the benefiting of an individual in this deen is hand-to-hand combat. It's hand-to-hand. You know, you have to basically yourself decide that I want to benefit an individual, and then you work on them one-on-one. Nowadays we think that the way that the community develops is by having huge gatherings, right? So you get 20,000 people together into a conference hall, and then you give them a lecture, and then everybody assumes that now the deen has grown, now the deen has progressed, now we've actually achieved something. But actually that's not the way by which this deen spreads. Deen is hand-to-hand. One individual goes out, and he strives and he struggles to convince another individual that this deen is beneficial. Then he brings them into the jama'ah. The jama'ah will sustain an individual, but actually the spreading of the deen and the establishing of the deen, that's a hand-to-hand game. So, now when you think about this advice that Mawlana Ashli Tanwi is giving, rahmatullah alayhi, you could say that, well, okay, that doesn't apply to me. He was a scholar. So of course he's going to gather together people in his community and he's going to speak to them. But it applies to all of us in that we should create small gatherings within our sphere of life. And what we should do is, if we're not able to address that small gathering, then what we should do is bring people in who can address that small gathering. Ideally, what you should do is gather together the younger people in your community, right? Or gather together the younger people in your family, the people over whom you have influence, and give them a very simple reminder. It doesn't take a lot, but it just goes to create that environment of spreading the deen. And this is basically what's being taught through this advice. So either you gather together the people of your family, the people who you have access to, and speak to them yourself and remind them to the best of your ability, or you create that gathering and you invite other scholars in to speak to those people. Because there are some people in this world that only you have access to that nobody else has access to. For example, look, we're sitting here right now, right? So I have access to this limited group of people. But every one of you has cousins, has nephews, has relatives, right? That you have access to that would never show up at ICC. They may never show up here. But you have access to them. You have the ability to change them. You have the ability to instill something within them. So, when Maulana Shafi'i Thanvi Sahib used to gather together the people of his village, he was gathering together a group of people that only he had access to. Those were the people of his village. You know, when an individual of your town, of your background, of your village comes and begins to speak to you, they can have an effect that perhaps nobody else can have. The most righteous person could come and sit in the middle of your family, and they could speak and they may not have any effect. But because you speak to them, because they look up to you, because they recognize you, because you understand them, you may be able to benefit them in a way that nobody else can benefit them. So you have to create these types of gatherings. You have to gather people for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And obviously whenever you gather people for the sake of Allah, then there's a whole degree of barakah that's associated with it, because now you're meeting people for the sake of Allah, you're falling in love with people for the sake of Allah, etc. So these are three very simple advices. Number one is to, when you are focused on some task, is to not be derailed from that focus. In the case of Maulana Shafi'i Thanvi Sahib, rahmatullah alayh, it referred to his putting his mail in a box so that he wouldn't be distracted for the 9 months of his studies. So that's something that we should keep in mind. Number two is to serve those people whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed you to take benefit from. It starts from your parents and then goes down to your teachers, right? And then number three is to create the gatherings of the deen, to create the gatherings of influence, to gather those people upon whom you can have an effect, and then to create an environment that will hopefully create a positive change within those people. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to take advantage of these three small advices, and may He make us among those who are regular in our efforts. Wa akhiru da'wana anil hamdulillahi rabbil alameen.